The sun had died. No, not in the grand, fiery explosion that humans had once imagined. It was smothered by an ash cloud so dense, so thick, that not even the strongest sunlight could break through. It wasn't a cataclysmic burst of fire that brought the end. It was quiet, a slow, deliberate death. The sun choked out, leaving the earth to languish beneath a blanket of cold. For the last 6 years, the world had been plunged into endless winter. The temperature had dropped to the point where even the coldest winters from before the sun's disappearance seemed like a distant memory. The wind howled day and night, it shrieked, the only voice that remained in the desolate landscape. In the heart of what was once a thriving city, now reduced to a skeletal structure of crumbling buildings and frozen streets, a small community huddled together. They lived in the remnants of an underground subway station, where the temperature stayed slightly warmer than the ice-covered surface above. The walls, reinforced with metal and concrete, were their last refuge. It was a fragile sanctuary, built from what remained of a world that had been swallowed by the cold. The survivors, no more than 50 souls, spent most of their days focused on survival. The resources were dwindling. Food was rationed, and even water had to be meticulously conserved, melting what little ice they could find. The supply of wood and fuel was almost gone, and the heat from the generator that powered their meager lights and the small furnace at the center of the station was enough only to keep them from freezing. Lena sat by the furnace, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her breath a faint mist in the air. She was one of the youngest survivors, barely in her 20s, but she had witnessed more than any young person should. Her mother had been taken by the cold long ago, her body found frozen in the alley of what had once been a bustling market street. Her father, a scientist, had died trying to build a device that could pierce the ash cloud and restore sunlight to the earth. But like so many others, his work had been in vain. The world had been dying for years, yet Lena's mind was always drawn back to the image of her father's final notebook entry, the one that spoke of hope, of an unknown land far to the south, untouched by the cold, a place where the sun still shone. It was the kind of dream that most had long abandoned. But for Lena, it had become an obsession. And then, one day, a stranger arrived. The man stumbled into their sanctuary in the dead of night, a figure cloaked in layers of tattered fabric, his breath heavy with exhaustion. He fell into the warmth of the furnace room, collapsing in front of the fire, his face hidden beneath the layers of his hood. The community's leader, Ray, stood up immediately, his hand on the worn pistol strapped to his belt. He wasn't one to trust outsiders easily, especially in a time when resources were so scarce. "Who are you?" Ray demanded, his voice steady but edged with suspicion. The man lifted his head slowly, revealing sharp, weathered features. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt. He appeared barely able to stand, yet there was something in his gaze, a quiet intensity that sparked hope in Lena's chest. "My name is Carson," he rasped, his voice hoarse from the long journey. "I've come to tell you. There's a place. A place where the sun still shines." Lena's heart skipped a beat. It was the same story her father had spoken of, the dream of a new land, untouched by the eternal winter. But could it be real? The skepticism that had settled over her heart for so long began to loosen, replaced by a cautious hope. "What do you mean?" Ray asked, his tone still suspicious, but a flicker of curiosity crossed his face. "You've been to this place?" Carson nodded, his hands shaking as he reached into his bag, pulling out a small, weathered map. "I was part of a group that left a year ago, heading south. We found a valley. A place where the cold hasn't touched. It's not much, but there's warmth. The sun. It's not the way it was, but it's better than this." The room fell silent. The survivors exchanged wary glances. A place where the sun still shone. It was almost too impossible to believe. For years, they had clung to the idea that the world had ended, that there was no hope left. But here, before them, was a man who spoke of something more. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. How far? How long would it take to get there? Carson's eyes met hers, and for the first time, the weariness in his face seemed to soften. 2 months, maybe 3. We've marked the way. We can guide you. Ray stepped forward, his brows furrowing. And why should we trust you? Carson's lips curled into a faint smile. You don't have to. But you don't have much choice. The cold is spreading. You know it as well as I do. Your supplies are running out. The cold will take you. It'll take all of us. Ray stood still for a long moment, the silence thick with unspoken tension. The survivors, too, were quiet, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. But they had all felt it, the slow, inevitable encroachment of the frost. The desperation that gnawed at their hearts each day. And then, Ray spoke. You're right. We don't have much time. Over the next few days, Lena found herself caught between hope and doubt. The idea of leaving the only place that had offered any semblance of safety in years seemed insane. The journey would be long and dangerous. The path they would have to follow led them through frozen ruins, across vast fields of snow, and through bitter winds that could freeze a person solid in a matter of hours. But Carson's story lingered in her mind. And the thought of a place where the sun still shone. It called to her. The group of survivors was small, but they had to make the decision. To stay was to die slowly. To leave was to risk everything. Ray called a meeting in the community's central hall. The survivors gathered in the dim light, huddled together for warmth. Lena stood at the back, listening as the discussion unfolded. Are we really going to trust this man? One of the older women asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. We've heard stories like this before. Dreams of paradise, but no one ever returns. Ray's gaze swept across the room, pausing on Lena for a moment. He knew the weight of the decision. They all did. We don't have a choice, Ray said finally, his voice firm. The cold is taking us. Carson's story may be the only chance we've got. We're leaving. And so it was decided. They would venture into the unknown. The journey was grueling. Each day, the group trekked through the frozen wasteland, battling the biting cold and unpredictable storms that threatened to consume them. Carson led the way, his weathered map guiding them through the landscape he had once crossed. Lena stayed close to him, her thoughts constantly spinning, but something in Carson's presence gave her a strange sense of assurance. As the days turned into weeks, their resources began to dwindle, but they kept moving. The cold seemed to bite deeper with each passing day, and some began to question their decision. But then, one day, as they crested a ridge, Lena saw it, something she hadn't dared to hope for. Far below, nestled between mountains, there was a valley. It wasn't warm, but there was something there, a faint, golden light that flickered across the land. The sky, though still gray, seemed lighter than it had been for years. Carson smiled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. We're almost there. The survivors stared down at the valley, a place they had only dared dream of. It was not a paradise, but it was a promise of warmth, of light, of life. And it was enough. Lena felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she couldn't explain why. It wasn't just for the land that lay ahead, but for the people they had lost, for the world that had died. But in that moment, she realized they weren't the last of humanity. They were only the beginning. And the sun, hidden behind the ash, would rise again.